Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Dark Art Society podcast. My name is Chet Zar. I'm your host. It is episode 273, and the date is January 17th, 2023. Wow, this month is zipping by. This week I've got an excellent interview with Brandon Grafius, who's a religious scholar, and he has a great book called Lurking Under the Surface that I highly recommend. I'm doing the audiobook right now. It's almost finished. And he talks about, he's a horror movie fan. He's a religious scholar and horror movie fan. And in this book, he relates the issues of horror movies, things that horror movies confront, with the issues that religion confronts, and helps us process. It's really interesting, really unusual, cool take, and super applicable to the kind of things we like to talk about on here regarding dark art and stuff. So get the book. It's great. I highly recommend it. Really well written and really fun too. So we had a great conversation all about horror movies, dark art, religion, all that sort of thing. What's been going on with me this week? I have been finishing these tool posters that I owe. I got 40 studies blocked out. So I got to finish those for my patrons on Patreon because I owe them studies. That and just, grieving the death of my dog that was about a week ago. I'm starting to feel kind of normal, or more normal enough to not feel like terrible every day. So that's a relief. When a pet, or a person for that matter, loved one dies, I guess loved one covers it all. You never know how long it's going to take to grieve. Grief is such a weird thing. I've lived through enough deaths in my life, and it's always different every time. So, but I'm starting to feel a little bit more normal now. So that's good. Because that was rough last week. Anyway, yeah. So if you want to support the podcast, go to patreon.com/darkartsociety, and you can be entered into winning a skull from Skull Shop if you join at the $5 level, and that's SKULLSHOPPE. They make amazing skulls. As you can see, this one right here, I use for all my reference, skull reference. And if you want to see what I'm up to and my artwork, you can go to patreon.com/Chet Zar. And, if you join on the Dark Art Society Patreon, you get your name read on the air every week. And I will do that now. You also get the podcast a day early, and the entry into the Facebook group, and the Discord server, and all that stuff. And you just support the podcast because, that's how I'm able to do it. It's from you guys supporting. Okay, new subscribers are Logan. Thank you, Logan. And Chris F. Labonte. Thank you both so much. Appreciate it. You're making this thing happen. I think that's it. Is there anything else I wanted to talk about? I don't think so. Let's get on with the interview. The interview was great. Brandon's such a cool guy and super smart, and has a lot of food for thought regarding horror movies and dark art and religion and stuff. So I think you're going to really dig it. Okay, that's it. Let's get on with it. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy it. Hello, Brandon.
Hey, Chet. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Oh, I'm really excited. Always excited to have people who are way smarter than me come and talk. I appreciate, as I'm a high school graduate who just got into the movie business right out of high school, and I'm just not that smart. So I always,
or you're smart enough to have not wasted so much time in academia.
no, it's like people who are really good at math. It's since I'm not good at it, I'm fascinated with people who are good at it. People who are in academia that have gone all that way and done all that. It seems like such a foreign thing to me. So I appreciate it. I appreciate smart people.
So much. And the admiration goes both ways, because I really admire the the ability to get out there and do something instead of needing to stay in this safe cocoon my whole life.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate what you do too, Chad.
Thanks. Yeah. So I think I heard you on Rebel Spirit Radio.
Yeah,
The interview.
right.
That was a great interview. And this angle of horror and the Bible is just so interesting to me, and it's, we've talked, this podcast is primarily focuses on dark art, which is the kind of stuff I do, which is horror inspired artwork, I guess you could say, but it's not that narrow of a field to me, but
Sure.
but often we talk about horror films and things relating to, I don't know, the dark side of creativity, I guess you could say, and art. And I've often thought about, and I've talked about it before, how there's such a horror element in many religions, and specifically Christianity and Catholicism and the Christ. Talk about a brutal image. The Christ on a cross, bleeding and suffering.
Yeah.
It's intense, and I've always felt like it was very kind of horror related.
Very much so. My initial response to Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ was that seeing it marketed as an evangelical film, I kind of wanted to keep it at arm's length. But as soon as I realized it's really a horror movie and that it's got all the
right.
all the trappings of horror,
it's like torture porn kind of
sound cues, everything. Yeah. It really. Then I was able to appreciate it in a different way.
Right. Interesting. So I don't know. Could you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, and then we could talk about this your book and your perspective on this?
Sure, sounds good. So I grew up in Michigan. I'm a third generation Michigan State Spartan. Both my dad and my grandfather were on the faculty there. I just did my undergraduate there before going on to different things. But I've always been a horror fan. I talk in my book how Scooby-Doo was kind of the gateway drug.
Right, yeah.
People my age have Scooby-Doo is that early experience, and then graduating on to some of the Disney movies that are way scarier than it seems like they should be. My particular one was Something Wicked This Way Comes.
Okay.
I still really admire to this day. I think there are some great things about it.
Oh, yeah.
And then just always found myself, I was reading Stephen King when I was in seventh grade. I just devoured everything I could of his. I remember joking to myself that most of his books made me check under the bed before I went to sleep. And then it made me not want to check under the bed because I was afraid I would find something. And then moved into horror movies from there, and kind of on a parallel track. I grew up as a progressive Christian. Was in the United Church of Christ denomination that was, one of the early Protestant denominations to ordain LGBTQ folk and things like that. But at the same time, so that's always been a part of me. But I always thought horror was this completely separate. A separate part of my identity.
Perversion.
Yeah. It was this guilty thing that I kind of kept locked up in the closet,
right,
and let it out every now and then. So as I found myself drawn to academia, at first I was pursuing creative writing. I did a master's in poetry at California Davis. And then that kind of was a dead end for me. I'd planned to go on for a PhD in literature, and that didn't work out. I didn't get accepted into the PhD program. So for a while, kind of thought that was the end of my academic career. It took me maybe 4 or 5 years to realize that's not a no, that's just a not yet. So eventually started looking at what seminary would be like, and wasn't sure if I was called to be some kind of a pastor or some kind of a biblical scholar. So started my Master of Divinity degree, and gradually found myself more and more drawn to studying the Old Testament as an academic pursuit. It was
Wow.
finally in my PhD program. I went to Chicago Theological Seminary for a PhD in Hebrew Bible. Um, and that was just kind of fortunate. They were kind of close by. They had some affiliation with the UCC denomination, so they seemed like people that I would get along with fairly well. But in hindsight, it's one of the few seminaries in the country that would have supported this rather odd thing that I stumbled on of connecting horror and the Bible together.
Right.
So my dissertation happened as I was reading through stuff for class, and there's this passage in the Book of Numbers. I don't think I've ever heard a sermon on the Book of Numbers in all my years of going to church. It's not one we read very much or spend a lot of time with.
Mm.
So it happens the Israelites are wandering through the desert. They've just escaped from Egypt and they're on their way to Canaan. And they start messing around with foreign women. Foreign women are often a problem in the Bible. God tells them to knock it off, but then an Israelite man brings a woman from the tribe of Midian into the camp, and they go into the tent together. Um, as they are there, Moses doesn't know what to do, but the priest Phineas picks up a spear and skewers them both, and then gets praised by God for his great zeal for the Lord. God
Mm.
apparently thinks this kind of murder is cool, at least in this passage. And so my first connection is, wait a minute, that death scene happens in Friday the 13th part 2.
Yeah.
Horror nerd that I also recognized. And then Friday the 13th part 2 is quoting Mario Bava's Bay of Blood or Twitch of the Death, whatever you want to call it. So that very death scene happens there. And that made me start thinking about this being something that is kind of hidden in plain sight, that the Bible has all kinds of horror stories in it.
Right.
And for me, as a person of faith, when I first read Numbers 25, I don't know quite what to do with it, because this is not the kind of God I want to be
Right.
want to be worshiping, or the kind of God I want to believe governs the universe. Someone who endorses murder of because you step outside of your own little ethnic enclave. But when we start to realize these are horror stories, for me, that really unlocks a whole bunch of things that we read them differently,
Right.
because we understand their horror.
Right.
So that was kind of the initial just insight that I had, and then found there were a few other people who had done some things kind of like this, but not as much as you might think. So I really started pursuing this track of what happens if we read the Bible like horror stories.
Right.
And then it can also work both ways, that you can see how much the Bible undergirds and supports the horror stories we tell today, whether they're movies or TV series or books or whatever. So that's kind of something I've been exploring since my days in the PhD program, and I haven't gotten tired of it since. I found that just continually new stuff to keep working with.
It's so cool. I love it. Yeah, it's so interesting. I mentioned before we started recording that I'm about I'm almost done with your book. Lurking Under the Surface is the title, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really great. It's so good. I recommend it to everybody who listens to this podcast. One thing I really liked about it is it's like so horror films are generally regarded as kind of low culture, and a lot of them are low culture and B movies. A lot of them are terrible. There are some really amazing ones that are great cinema, like The Exorcist and stuff. Night of the Living Dead. Lots of great films. But there's this whole aspect of it that's just pure trash, but that's enjoyable as well. I can tell it just, your references to Mario Bava and stuff. We're on the same page.
Yeah. I love really good horror movies, but I think I'm with you that I can usually find something to enjoy in really bad horror.
Yeah, there's a different reason for loving it, but it's still wrapped up in horror, which is fun for us. But I do really like the bad stuff as well, the really bad stuff. I don't like the stuff that's trying to be bad. I like the stuff where they were trying hard and they failed.
The Icarus movies that were flying too high and crashed into the ocean.
Like Plan 9 from Outer Space or something. It's like,
that would be so much fun.
Anyway, what I was going to say is what I really enjoyed about the book is that, you as an academic are kind of validating horror in a sense. You're saying there's more to it than that. There's more to it than that. And for horror fans, and specifically people that have been turned off to Christianity because of fundamentalism, you're kind of showing like this is how Christianity should be. That's how I took it. I was like,
Wow.
why can't every Christian be like this? This is like this is my perspective of Christianity. Like I wasn't raised very religious, but it was there. My mom was she was into like New Thought and New Age stuff and spirituality, but we went to church and stuff. She taught at an Episcopalian school at one point. So it was around, just like it's around it's part of American culture. People don't even realize that 99% of the phrases we use day to day are like biblical things. They're things from the Bible. Anyway, so my mom, my parents were cool about it. I feel like I've got this perspective on Christianity. Like I always say, half jokingly, that my biggest exposure to Christianity was Jesus Christ Superstar, because that was like a big movie to watch with our family.
I think it was a lot of people's biggest exposure to
Christianity. And I always thought Jesus is cool. It's like he was awesome in that. It's like I just found that to be a great movie. I remember I made like little comics after I saw that movie, like little 3-panel comics that are sort of like funny Jesus Christ Superstar moments, sort of. But anyway, point being is, I'm sure, as you well know, Christianity gets such a bum rap because of the far right and the crazy faction of fundamentalism. And it's like,
those voices are loud enough that we earn that bum rap. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, right. But it's like, it's a bummer for you, people like myself who always felt like it was, there was just a beautiful, positive message there about loving each other. And it's a shame. It's a shame that has, it's got, I'm sure you feel it a lot more than I do, since you're in there. But I appreciate that I feel like both of those things are served in your book, if that makes any sense.
I try to think of it as an apologetics for kind of both sides.
Right. Yeah, that's perfect.
You have this phrase apologetics that is really understood as explaining the difficult problems in religion. I think of it sometimes more as the problems in religion being the closed-minded, reactionary forces that are so loud in our culture today. So I feel like I've got to offer an apologetics that Christianity, as you say so well, can be bigger than that, can be more kind than that, and can be more supportive and open than that. And then at the same time, an apologetics for horror movies.
Yeah.
These movies are how we take these big questions and how we process them, how we try to work through them.
Right. And I find it interesting as well that, like, the funny thing about horror films is you've got folks like you and I who were raised in them, and we love them, and we think they're cool, and we would like to make a movie. But a lot of the movies that we were raised on were kind of garbage, made by people, not all of them, but made by people to make a quick buck. They're made to make a quick buck. And so you think, well, how is there any value in that? How is anything positive? But the thing is, the reason they make a quick buck is because they are exploiting, in a way, with these crappy grindhouse movies and stuff. They're taking their cues from society's fears and anxieties, and that's what gives them meaning, I guess. You know what I mean? So it's like they wouldn't be making the movies if we didn't go to see them, and the reason that we want to see them is because we have these feelings. Because
it says something to us, because it somehow taps into those fears and anxieties we have. And even if it's in kind of a schlocky, ham-handed way, it still gets there.
Right. Yeah. So I always, for a long time I was wondering, because my artwork is really influenced by these horror movies and horror comics I grew up with. And I try to me, they meant something. So I try and elevate them. That's kind of like this thing I'm doing with my art. I want to like paint them beautifully so that I elevate this low cultural thing to a high cultural thing, kind of like a transmutation of a lower energy or an alchemical kind of thing into
Yeah.
a beautiful higher thing. And I was always kind of like, maybe I'm reading into these horror movies. Maybe they're not that good, but but coming to that realization that even the bad horror movies can have meaning because, again, repeating my point that it does come from somewhere, these fears that we have, and the movies wouldn't be successful if they didn't address things that we were concerned about,
Absolutely. No, I think that's a really good way to put it. And I love that phrase about trying to transmutate low art into high art, or just kind of blur those boundaries and
Mm-hmm.
recognize that high art is its own form of genre and has its
Right.
own sort of cliches and things like that. And the cliches that we tend to validate more, but really high art and low art are all mixed up together, and beauty and ugliness are mixed up in
Right.
kind of that same way.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that you really do in your art is take these images that we might associate with ugliness and ask us to look at them a different way, to say, well, what is beautiful about this kind of
Right.
ugliness?
Right. Yeah. It's a strange thing. Working, because I used to work in the film industry for about 20 years. I was makeup effects. I may have worked on movies that you've seen, probably like The Blob. Did you see The Blob?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
the
Yes.
remake of The Blob. That was like my first big movie I worked on. And it's, this might sound a little weird, but I worked on the Blob victims shop. There was two shops together in one big shop. On one side was Lyle Conway and all the Blob stuff, and then the other side was all the victims, and I was on the victims crew.
So you'll probably remember this better than I do, but I remember being about maybe 13 or 14 when that came out on video, somewhere
Mm-hmm.
around there.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of my introduction to horror movies, my parents would go on date night every weekend, and my brother was about 6 years younger than me, so they would leave me home as the babysitter with a frozen pizza for each of us, and we'd each get to pick a movie. So I'd watch like He-Man or whatever with my brother, and then send him off to bed, and then I could watch the horror movie I picked out. So I remember was watching the Blob, and there's a scene where somebody like gets caught in the Blob, and someone's trying to pull him out, and the guy's arm falls off.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Am I remembering that right?
Yep, yep. She's trying to
I
pull him, and it yanks off.
Yeah,
I was
I
there.
remember that
I was
being
there
so
on set that day.
That's
I did. Donovan Leitch was the actor. It was the son of the '60s musician Donovan. Yeah, I did his makeup that day.
Oh, that's so cool.
But what I was gonna say was, as part of our reference for creating these victims, we had books, but this is back before the internet. So it was like, I was just out of high school. I was maybe 19. I worked on that. And, so it was 86 or something like that. So we had these books that were forensic books that showed like
Yeah.
decaying bodies. And, it was for professionals, forensic professionals. And so we would, that was a common thing in the makeup effects business. Is these books were like, that's where you got your reference. That's how you know to make stuff look real. And it always struck me that it's like, again, it's going to sound weird, but you'd have these dead bodies, and some of the colors were just, if you were able to not see how horrible it is that someone's died and it's someone's loved one, the colors were kind of beautiful in a weird way, like these purples and yellows it's so strange, but you have to kind of like distance yourself in a way. But there's really, even in like guts and stuff, when you see operations, it's like there's a beauty to organs and the way they're positioned, and it's, you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. If you know Stan Brackage's movie, The Art of Seeing with One's Eyes, he was kind of an experimental
Mm-hmm.
filmmaker in like the 70s,
Mm-hmm.
and had this maybe 25 or 30-minute short that's just a film of an autopsy.
Oh,
But what's so
wow.
striking about it is there's no narration behind it. Like you're used to when you see images like that, you have this kind of scientific authoritative voice that
Right.
helps to frame it and put it into context for you and tell you this is what you're seeing, and it helps you make meaning of it. And without that, you're left with nothing but the aesthetics of it. Like you're just looking at these images.
Right, right.
Mhm.
Yeah, that struck me struck me at a young age that, you know, wow, there's a beauty there. Or I remember hearing, I forget who it was, talking about death as being it's poetic. There's a poetic aspect to things like death, and if you think about it, there kind of is. My dog just died. My yeah, it's
No.
it's rough, but there, and I've been in the room when my mother-in-law died, and there is this strange poetic quality to it. You know, it's like with my mother-in-law, you just, you know, you felt her go away, you know, and it was peaceful and it was kind of beautiful.
Yeah,
It sounds strange, but it really was like sublime, you
that's a good
know,
word.
you
Yeah.
know. So I guess my point is there's beauty everywhere, and it's kind of, you know, how you look at things, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's really true that it's how you look at things and how we figure out how to make meaning out of these things that
Right.
in some ways death is so inexplicable and
Right.
far beyond what any of us are able to understand.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to tell these stories and produce these images that give us some way to interpret it, figure out how we internalize it and think through it ourselves. And then, of course, lying in the background, whenever we experience death, we're all thinking about how are we going to come to terms
Right.
with our death that
Yeah. Yeah.
is
And
really unthinkable. We can't think of our own
I
death.
know.
We can always imagine ourselves, whenever you try to think of your own death, you're like Tom Sawyer hiding out in the rafters watching your own funeral.
Yeah.
Can't
Yeah.
really imagine yourself as dead.
I know. Yeah. And that's the thing that's like every single person has that concern. You know, I've been through, I've had these, I don't know if you've ever, out of body experiences for in that hypnagogic state.
Yeah.
I started having them around 12 or 13 years old. And I remember not the first time, the first time was terrifying because I saw this scary man standing next to me, hitting me with the pillow over and over. It was like nightmare. It was
Wow.
so scary. But the other one, the next one I had, I left my body and I was floating around, and it was the best feeling. It felt so good. I felt like this is me without any of my negative emotions, any baggage. It felt like it felt like my soul. And at that moment I knew this is what death is like. I just knew it. I was like, this
Beautiful.
is what dying is like. And if this is what dying was like, there's nothing to worry about,
It's okay.
you know? So
Yeah.
you know, but then, you know, time goes on and then you start thinking, oh man, it's like, oh God, you know, you just start, it's like, I have to kind of try and take myself back to that moment and realize how sure I was at the moment, how
Yeah.
real it was to me, you know? But anyway,
Yeah.
but the point was that I guess, you know, it's as common as love or hate or anything that all people, you know, go through, is that they're going to die, and we all
Yeah.
know it. And that's
Yeah.
why I think these stories are so important.
Yeah, it gives us a chance to reflect on that, to think about what that might look like and how we make meaning out of our lives through that process.
Yeah. And stories are, you know, stories are how we do it, whether it's stories through art or writing or movies.
I even think of my academic work as being really about storytelling
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of ways.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. That's true.
We're all trying to tell stories.
Yeah, it's interesting how, you know, if you get down to it, it's seems like it's creativity. It's creativity in many different ways, that like whether it's even if, like you're saying, academic papers or writings, that's a creative process. It's like when we create and produce things that,
At least it should be a creative
yeah.
process. A lot of
Right.
times we tell ourselves that if you have the creative turned down at all, that's not real academic work. And I think that's one of the things I'm really trying to push back on my work is this idea that the academic work and the creative work are two sides of a spectrum that shouldn't meet each other ever. I'm interested in, kind of like we were talking about with your work with beauty and ugliness. Like what happens if we acknowledge that creativity and academia really should go together,
Right.
that you can tell some really interesting stories when you're working with combinations of those things.
Yeah, yeah. And and that's the horror in the Bible as well.
Yeah.
It's like you're combining these two
Yeah.
things. So yeah, that's interesting.
I'm always interested in what happens when you take those things that shouldn't go together and kind of
Right.
shake them up and see what you come up with.
That's art. That's
Yeah.
art though. That's like the or one aspect of art is combine, especially surrealism, combining
Yeah.
things that don't seem like they should be together and making it feel like they belong together and to make a new
Yes.
thing.
You sometimes run into dead ends, but that's part of the
Yeah,
process.
right.
It happens. Not everything can go together no matter how hard you try, but sometimes you find some things that, wow, those connections are there, and that's really surprising and really interesting to keep
Yeah.
working with it.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm so glad that you mentioned Night of the Living Dead in the book because that's one of my favorite movies. That's my I don't know that's my Scooby Doo, I guess.
Ah,
That's
yeah.
that was although oh no, Milton the Monster. I'm a little older than you, so I don't know if you got that, but
I
Milton
don't
the
know if I remember that one
you should
now.
look it up. You should look it up.
Okay.
It's a really good-hearted horror themed Frankensteinish cartoon
Okay.
from the 60s. And I caught it in because I was born in 67, so I probably caught it in the early 70s when I was really young. But Milton the Monster, he's really great. There's episodes on YouTube. but Night of the Living Dead was probably the first movie that I can remember that just really terrified me, but I couldn't not watch it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I saw it on TV, and every year it would come on, and I would just watch it, and it would just make me feel so scared.
It sure got that sense of at least I still feel like this when I watch it. I'm not quite sure how far it's going to go. I don't trust it to keep me safe as a spectator.
Right.
And I think I remember Wes Craven in an interview saying that for a really good horror director, you as an audience should have suspicions about whether he has your best interest at heart or not.
That's a good point.
And that's one of the things I really love about the genre of horror, that I feel like a lot of genres, they have these really firm guardrails as a way to keep you safe as a spectator, that
Right.
you know you're going to be within these boundaries, and it's not going to go too far.
Right.
With horror, part of the idea of the genre is that those guardrails are permeable.
Right.
Sometimes you don't know quite where you're going to end up, and part of the sometimes you see a horror movie and I at least I don't respond well. I'll say, that was maybe a little more than I wished it had done, and that's part of the experience of being a horror fan, is that you go there sometimes.
Right.
And that's part of the process of having those limits explored and sometimes expanded and sometimes pushed upon.
Right.
Part
You
of
know,
what it means to be
I,
a fan.
I know I'm going to sound like an old man, but when I say this, but not, and I'm not saying this for all modern horror movies, but there have been a few that I've seen where I felt like they are mean spirited and they don't have the heart. Even Night of the Living
Yeah,
Dead, I felt had a heart and a soul to it.
absolutely.
Even with that grim ending, I felt
Yeah.
like even though it had that grim ending, there was, I don't know, it's something you can't really put your finger on, but I think it was, and maybe it was my state of mind. I only watched it once. Maybe I wasn't in the right frame of mind. But the Evil Dead remake, I watched that and I was like, it felt like it just didn't have a good heart behind it, or it was kind of mean spirited, or
Yeah. No, I really see what you mean. Night of the Living Dead, that ending is so awful, but you feel like the movie understands it's awful, and it is with
right,
you in that
right,
awful.
right. That's a great point.
And sometimes it feels like movies are. I think that the Evil Dead remake's a good comparison, where it feels like it's almost rubbing your face in the awfulness and kind of laughing at you.
Right. Yeah, that's not what
It's
I'm.
not on the journey with you in the
Yeah,
same way as something like Night of the Living Dead.
right.
I recently watched Speak No Evil, and I'm really, really torn about that one.
Is it new?
Yeah, it's on Shudder right now, and I've
Okay.
seen a lot of discussion on it on Twitter. I've seen it in a lot of top 10 horror movie lists of the last year, and I came away from it thinking I'm not sure.
Hmm.
The ending is such a kick in the teeth, and I'm not sure if the rest of the movie is worth it or if it really
Right.
gets you to a point where you're ready to accept that as a profound, emotionally resonant kick in the teeth, or whether it's just abusive.
Right. That it's funny. Now that you mention it, uh, what's the movie? It'll come to me. Uh, it's the Frank Darabont, who I'm a huge fan of. Frank
The
Darabont.
Mist.
The Mist. That ending, because the ending in the book I thought was amazing. The,
It's
the ending in the
completely different book.
the
Yeah.
ending in the book, right, where that giant creature just walks over them and they just kind of go off,
Well,
right?
and they have that, but then in the ending of the book, they're sitting in a hotel room, and they don't know if they're going to have enough gas to go anywhere the
Right,
next day, and they don't know what's going to happen next, and it just kind of ends with this: do we still have hope, even though there is no logical
right,
reason
right.
to hope in anything? Yeah.
I was fine. That ending, I never struck me as a bad ending or anything. And I know that ending of From the Mist was very uh, divisive. It was like people
Yeah.
loved it or people hated it. I was one of the haters. How did you feel about that ending?
I really loved it.
Okay, so you're one of the people
Yeah,
that loved it.
I wrote an essay about it a little while ago, comparing it to the French movie Martyrs,
I
looking
haven't
at
seen
these as
Martyrs.
movies. It's another fascinating kick in the teeth movie.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
with this idea that I read the Mist, the movie version, as we do have an idea that the divine is behind all this. We have revelation from the divine.
Hmm.
What I think the end tells us is that the crazy evangelical lady was right, and that we needed a sacrifice.
Oh,
God was
wow.
angry, and we needed a sacrifice to make all this go away. And so we
Interesting.
have she was saying we need expiation, we need to kill the boy. And now the boy
Interesting.
gets killed and the monsters go away.
Wow.
And what a terrifying universe that is, to imagine that
Right, right.
really wants this sacrifice.
I'm gonna
Um,
watch it again. I'm gonna watch it again because I trust you.
oh wow, thank you. But
I
it's also okay that people respond differently to horror
Yeah, I
movies.
know, but
That's
I
one of the
want, if something, it's like if something that someone that likes the same kinds of things that you do, that you trust, like something, you want to like it. Or you at least, I want to be able to see it from that angle, even if it still ends up not resonating with me, and it's been a while.
I'll send you a copy of this article. You might
Okay.
be in. I got an email out of the blue a few years ago asking if I wanted to contribute a chapter to a book called the T&T Clark Handbook of Jesus in Film. And they wanted to know do you want to write about Jesus in horror movies? And maybe you
Yeah.
could write about the Antichrist. And I thought, oh, sure, I can do that. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, boy, writing about the Antichrist in horror is no fun. How
Yeah.
about I write about actual times when there are messianic figures in horror films? It's terrifying that these messianic figures get us in touch with the divine, and we do not like the message.
Right. Cool. I can't wait to read it. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you one thing that comes up often on this podcast, because mostly I interview other artists that are kind of dark artists that are attracted to this. They're always nice. They're the sweetest people. They're animal lovers, often vegetarian, progressive. They're very nice people. It's weird. Like I started noticing this pattern that these people were extra nice. They're extra kind-hearted. Like it was weird,
And this is my experience of horror fans and
Right.
people in the community. Yeah.
Yeah, it's such an odd thing, but and the other thing is that is common. It seems to be common is that this feels this love of horror and dark art. It feels almost genetic or something. It feels like, like you're telling your story of, your childhood and, reading Stephen King books as a teenager. It's like, that was me. Same thing.
Yep.
It was like, and these stories are common with folks that are into horror movies and stuff. I mean, what do you think about that? Why do you think there are certain people that are into this? Do you think it's just we're kind of like oriented that way, or
We're
what?
we're built different, as my kids would say. No, I do feel like I'm trying to think of all the people I know. I'm not sure if I know any people who became fans of horror later in life.
All right,
I
interesting.
feel like pretty much everybody has that kind of childhood experience that you were introduced to kind of the early gateways to horror, and you just got it right away. Like
Right,
it scratched an itch, it spoke something to you that other things didn't.
right,
So I do think that it's people who love roller coasters or people who love whatever they love.
right.
But horror is so unique in that some of us just love it so much and can't get enough, and others are like, nah, no thanks. I'll just nothing in there for me at all.
I know.
So it does really seem like there is some temperamental thing or something that I don't know if we can explain. And then I
Yeah,
think that question of are nice people drawn to horror, or does horror make people nicer? I think
right.
it's fascinating.
Well, it seems like the thing I've noticed, and I've interviewed hundreds at this point, probably a couple hundred at least, dark artists. I know the community really well, and it seems to be that almost all of them have more empathy maybe than average,
Yeah,
and I'm the same way. It's like I'm very just sensitive to the suffering of animals and
yeah.
people. You know how it is. Um, but it's just I don't know. It just seemed like someone should study this. This is so unusual.
Yeah. There was a study a couple of years ago that was not quite looking at empathy. It was looking at resilience and horror.
Hmm.
And was like, one of those hardcore scientific psychological studies, and found that there was a positive correlation between people who were horror fans and resilience in life.
I could say
Um,
that with
yeah,
with
I
my
think that's
situation for sure. Because I see. Here's the thing. I somebody made a documentary about me. I'll send you a link if you want to watch it. It's from 2016 or 2013. I don't even remember. But it's a really good documentary. And through that, I had to like look at my life, and they interviewed people, and so I really had a couple of years there where I was really like how he was interviewing me for it. I had to kind of go through my life and really start thinking about this, because this has always been intuitive to me. It's just like I like it. It makes me feel good. It's fun. That's it.
yeah,
But I had to go back to my childhood, and I thought about, these things that happened to me as a kid. My parents divorced when I was 5. There was a lot of brother and sister fighting, a lot of bad stuff. And I kind of took refuge in my artwork while all this chaos was going around me. And in a way, it was kind of helped me to survive. And, but it's like my brother and sister. So anyway, I was wondering if, I grew up with like a lot of terror around me, horror in a way, and but my brother and sister didn't grow up to be big horror fans. You know what I mean? And they went through pretty much the same thing I did. So
yeah.
I just don't know how much of it is, nature versus nurture, I suppose.
Sure.
It's always been a mystery, but it's funny because it seems like, okay, maybe it was a way of processing what I was going through, but it feels like I would have liked that stuff anyway. It just always has made me feel good. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I've read all kinds of studies about the benefits of horror, like why people are drawn to it and things like that. But they never get to, okay, if horror has these psychological and emotional benefits, why do some people like it and not others? Doesn't
Right, right, right.
other than like some vague things about, some people have higher intensity thresholds or, things like that, that it's kind of like, well, sure, but I don't know how much that really really
Yeah,
tells.
yeah. Yeah, it's I've it almost feels like I'm when I think about that stuff I'm searching for I'm trying to make that narrative fit into who I am now, and it's more like I've just always been attracted to it. It feels like there's some cross wiring in my brain to where I hate suffering. I hate I hate really bad things. I'm empathetic, but aesthetically, I really enjoy the dark aspect of horror movies, artwork, villains. I find just kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think we've known that ever since Milton.
right,
I can't remember who it was who quipped that in Paradise Lost, the devil got all the best lines,
right,
which is absolutely true. He's a fantastic character.
right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, the that's I. That's the thing with monsters and horror movies as well is like people do kind of love the monsters as much as they're afraid of them. They also
We love them. We like to see that kind of. I always think there's a really interesting play in horror movies that we in some ways kind of side with the monster, that we like to see this transgression. Scholar Jeffrey Jerome Cohen said we admire the monster for its freedom, and I think there's something with that. Maybe we don't want to go off on a rampage like that, but we like not having boundaries and not having people tell us what to do.
right.
But we're also scared enough that we like to see it be put in its place by the end and have it again. So we horror gets to kind of activate both of those sides of our brain.
Right. Yeah, it's almost kind of like taking a way of taking or acknowledging and externalizing this part of ourselves
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
watching it do its thing and getting some satisfaction out of that and then putting it back hidden in the
And
end.
then
It's
say,
safe.
okay, you've done your thing. Now it's time to go away. Now I feel better, and not necessarily purged, but at least calmed and
Right.
ready to move on from that
Right,
now.
right. Yeah, one thing, I went to a therapist in the early 90s, early mid 90s, and because of all this childhood trauma in my family I went through, and it was amazing. It was a lifesaver for me. And one thing she said about me always drawing monsters was, in a sense, I was gaining a sense of mastery over things that I was afraid of.
Yes.
And so when I was drawing them, I was the creator of them.
Yep.
And that kind of did make sense to me.
And I think on a smaller level, those of us who just watch the movies or take in visually your artwork or read the stories, that we have that same kind of experience of mastery.
Yeah.
That being a reader, being a visual interpreter, we are in charge. We're in control.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. I think that's what people, fans of the artwork too, that aren't necessarily artists, also very empathetic, sweet people. I found. Yeah, I think it's a way. I've often said that on the podcast that it's kind of like a safe way to confront the things that we're afraid of with the artwork.
Yeah.
And it's a necessary part of culture. It's as necessary as anything else we need to survive as humans. I think it's important. Which
Absolutely. And that kind of connects to one of the things I've been working with in my own work for a while is this main question of why is there so much horror in my location, coming from the Christian tradition. Why is there so much horror in Christianity? And I think as you mentioned earlier, you could play that game with a lot of religions, because
right.
it's pretty central to most religions that there is a lot of horror. And I guess what I've come down to is that if all we talk about is love and kindness, that's great. But then when we experience the world in a different way, we don't really know what to do with it. We
Right.
don't have any of the resources to say, well, this doesn't fit in my love and kindness framework. Unfortunately, I think often our response in many religions is to kind of ignore that part of our resource of our tradition, those resources that we have because they're uncomfortable. Because we'd rather not think about experiencing God as a punishing presence. We'd rather
Right.
not think about times when people are really awful to each other. We
Right.
just want to think about turn the other cheek and let's love your brother and sister, which is really important and what we hope we can all get to. But you've got to acknowledge the uglier parts of our world and of ourselves, or else it just rings false. And then yeah, we don't know what to do with when we're confronted with
Yeah,
those
yeah. And it
things.
will, it will happen to you at some point, it'll happen to you a number of times because that's the way life is.
Well,
Um,
yeah.
just read the news online and
Yeah,
every
yeah,
day. Yeah, yeah, that's a strange thing. Like in a sense, I mean, with this podcast, I felt like in a way I'm doing, or with the podcast, with being a calling myself a dark artist and leaning into that, I
yeah,
feel like I'm hoping that it will help to integrate that into the broader culture because I think there's value there for people to not look away in the way that you had mentioned.
yeah.
I think that society would be better off by using the tools that are there to deal with these things. Like you're saying, it's in the Bible, but people don't want to think about it.
Yeah.
But to you, I mean, it's there for a reason. We need it. We need these things. We need this dark imagery and horror movies and stuff to help us through life.
I love that phrase. We need it. I think that's
Yeah.
just well put. And we either ignore them or I mean, when I look back on what I learned in Sunday school as a kid, and I think what everybody learns in Sunday school, I'm not picking on my particular church or anything, about how Noah's Ark gets turned into a story about fuzzy animals and happy songs that we sing about rise and shine and give God the glory. When this is really a terrifying story about God being so angry that the world is getting destroyed and almost all life with just this very small remnant is being wiped out along with it. You
Right.
know, Darren Aronofsky's or newish movie on Noah kind of dove into what does that really look like and where is the
How
horror in
was
that.
that? I didn't see it. I haven't seen
I,
it.
I like it a lot.
Really?
I know a lot of people were frustrated because it not only used the story from Genesis, it used a lot of places outside of the Bible. There's this book called First Enoch that kind of it's like riffed improvisation on the book of
Hmm.
Genesis and fills in the gaps and tells different stories about some of the people and things like that. And Aronofsky used a lot of that book as well as
Mm.
the story from Genesis. So I think a lot of people were just baffled that this is supposed to be a Bible story and there are like rock giants and all these weird things
Right.
happening.
I
But
got. I got.
I thought it came.
I got. They wanted me to work on that,
Oh wow, no
but
way.
I was like, they wanted me to go to New York for it. And I'm like, I'm not going. I don't want to go to New York. I can do the. I mean, it's like I could do this. You could do remote work.
Do a lot of things, but not go to New York.
Well, I mean, I've been to New York. I had a couple shows in New York, and I really loved New York. I just, I traveled a lot when I was younger for my work in the movie industry. I worked in China for like 3 months, 4 months. Went to Italy, worked on a movie there.
Remote work probably looked a little bit different in that
Yeah.
time.
So, I was never a big traveler, and
Yeah,
I'm a homebody. I'm a complete homebody, and so I got
yeah.
all kinds of traveling that I didn't really want, but it was good. It was great. Traveling is important, I think, but I'm so over airplanes and waiting in lines and all that stuff. And I had stuff going on. I have a art business. I can't just drop everything and go
Yeah,
work on a movie at this point, unless it's
yeah,
something amazing. But anyway, I just thought that was funny.
that is funny.
So how did the how did you start writing the book? How did that come about?
So kind of I'd written a couple of academic monographs, books that have as many footnotes as they have, more footnotes than they have
Okay.
pages, and that are too expensive for any normal people to afford. That their business model is that libraries will buy them,
Mm,
and so that's great. That's how you start with academia. But I was really thinking about feeling like these ideas are cool enough that I want to share them with more people. I want to be talking about this in a format that I can have conversations with people like you. I
mm,
can share them with. They don't have to just stick within the walls of academia and just
yeah.
be read by a few graduate students who are also working on numbers 25 or
Right.
whatever
Right.
really specific narrow focus. So I started thinking about what can I do to kind of broaden not only my audience but broaden these ideas,
Yeah. Yeah. I think
so
it's
that they
important to get it out,
yeah,
to
I,
get it
I
out
really, I
there.
really do. And I felt like I'd kind of done my apprentice work, so to speak, in writing with writing these narrowly focused academic books. So I started thinking about what I could do to make that more accessible and kind of give it a hook that a publisher would be interested in. And I guess what I came up with was let me start telling some stories. So I really tapped into that my creative writing background as a way to kind of blend, as I guess as we were talking about earlier, say, well, what happens if we really lean into the storytelling part of academia?
Hmm.
It was kind of funny. I had, or not funny, just odd timing that I remember the very specific day when I had written maybe 15 pages or so of the book and had enough of a proposal that I felt like I'm ready to start sending this off to agents. And I was sitting in a cafe in Mason and doing all my research on what agents might be interested in something like this and sending them off to a few, including the one who ended up picking up the book for representation. And as this is happening, I'm watching the news go, oh wow, the NBA playoffs just got canceled. It was that very day when it felt like COVID all of a sudden just became
Oh
real
wow.
for everybody, when the world just realized we're shutting down.
Right.
So a lot of the book was written during the pandemic. I think I'm one of many people who wrote a book during the pandemic. What else were we going to do?
Right.
Um, so that was kind of the genesis of it. Um, Thinking through, so I've got this basic idea that religion and horror are ways that we ask the same kinds of questions. So I organized the book on what questions are those, looking at
Right.
questions of hope, looking at questions of justice, looking at remembering, looking at the goodness of God. I think I maybe get to the mist a little bit in the book at
Mm.
my end. Um, so yeah, then as a way to just think through all those questions, and always with the idea on I want to tell my story of why both of these things, horror and religion, are so moving to me and have helped me process so much of the world.
Yeah.
It's kind of my North Star for the book, is keeping the focus on that question and exploring it in these two realms.
That's awesome. Yeah. Again, I do, I felt like I got something, I got something, out of it from both sides of the issue. Like it was so nice to hear, someone speaking about the Bible in a way that resonated with me. And it was like, that's, it's, it's like, again, it's so hard to, not be overtaken by the crazy people. And, this is how my mom, this is how I was taught Christianity. Was basically kind of the way you,
Yeah.
talked about it. I didn't feel like it wasn't dogmatic. It wasn't, it wasn't judgmental. It was very cool. It was cool. It's like this, and so I just feel like you nailed it on both ends of it. I really,
That means a lot to me,
yeah, you
man.
should be proud of yourself. I think it's awesome.
Growing up in the small little enclave of Christianity it was kind of this growing realization that, wow, this is not what a lot of Christians are like, and this is not how a lot of people view Christianity. I think that was a real impetus for me further studying religion, is saying, I don't want the fundamentalists to be the only Christians who have a
Right,
voice. I
right,
really want to have a seat at the table. I want to be able to talk about these things and say, there's another way to look at it. You don't have to be, yeah, judgmental and dogmatic and focused on what other people are doing wrong.
right.
There are really, really ways to use religion as a positive way
Mhm.
to help us grow individually and in community, and it doesn't have to be negative and judgmental.
Right, right. Yeah, I feel like it's the more difficult. It's easier to just go, okay, I'm done with Christianity. There's too many
Yeah,
assholes in it. You
and
know,
I understand that view.
yeah,
I
right,
really do. I
right.
sure felt that way myself.
Yeah, I feel like you've taken the more difficult path and the more kind of heroic path, where it's like, I'm not going to let this thing that has value be taken from me by these assholes. It's like, you
I
know what I'm
remember seeing a T-shirt a couple of decades ago that said, "Jesus, please save me from all of your
right?
followers." That resonated with me deeply. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I just am so impressed with the book. I really enjoyed it, or am enjoying it. I'm almost done. So you got to tell me some of your favorite horror movies of all time, if you can pick. It's hard to
Oh,
choose one or
it
choose a
is hard
few.
to choose. In the book I talk about the one that has scared me the most as an adult was probably Sinister, which I think is really, really underrated. Also,
S-
um, nuts. Who's the? That's it's Scott Derrickson directed that one, right?
Sinister. Okay, Sinister. I get confused with. Is Sinister the one with the Super 8 movies? Or
Yeah, the true crime writer and the
yeah,
Super 8.
yeah, yeah. I really
And
enjoyed that.
there was a time when there were all these like horror movies that would have one word titles that were just vaguely
Right.
menacing sounding words, sinister, insidious,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right. That's
bad emotion,
exactly,
or things like
exactly.
that. Yeah, yeah. So that one I still keep coming back to and think it's I feel like it's kind of growing in stature. That when it first came out, everybody kind of it was just another horror movie, but then
Right.
people that's really interesting.
Yeah, I liked it. I like. You know what I did? The only thing I didn't like it was that final.
The final jump scare.
Yeah, it's like I'm not a jump scare guy. It's like that's the easy thing to do.
You've heard the quip that jump scares are the fart jokes of horror movies.
No, that's perfect.
Um, I'm torn about it because on one hand, that final jump scare is really cheesy, but on the other hand, it's this idea throughout the movie that as soon as you watch this movie, you're marked. I think I love it because it really reflects on
Yeah,
what horror does to us,
that's a
and
good
now
point.
because we've watched it, this rather silly Mesopotamian demon has marked us.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
I can see it. I can almost forgive it for that, but yeah, it's also really right. And of course, I keep coming back to The Shining as one that
Okay, yeah, that's a great
Kubrick
one.
Kubrick version that as a kid. I watched it, I think, first when I was, again, 12 or 13, right around that age. And
Mm,
you're terrified thinking of yourself as this little boy being chased around by your dad. But
yeah,
returning to it as an adult with kids, it's like, man, what part
right.
of me is like Jack Torrance?
Yeah,
It becomes really scary thinking of seeing yourself in this father figure, this guy
right.
who struggles with his own aspirations and feeling like his family has
Yeah, you as
derailed.
a writer as well.
Oh yeah, yeah. Stephen King has so many failed writers who are just
Right.
terrifying figures. Yeah, so I love that one.
Yeah, that's a great one.
From last year, I keep coming back to a Norwegian movie called The Innocents is my favorite horror movie
Hmm.
from
I'll
the
have to write
last
that
year.
one down. I haven't
Also,
seen it.
also on Shudder.
Okay, cool.
It was one that I saw it on iTunes and was reading reviews about it. My general goal with iTunes is like I will check a few movies every week to see if the price drops, and
Hmm.
the price didn't drop on it before it went to Shudder. So finally, I was able to see it, and yeah, it's one of those terrifying in broad daylight movies.
Oh, good.
Group of kids in a what would look to us like a public housing project, but I imagine in Norway it's coded a little differently. So there are these kids who are on summer break and not as supervised as maybe they should be, and they gradually realize that they have some psychic powers that
Hmm.
work in conjunction with each other, so that
Oh,
when
cool.
together they have different pairings of them, and then they gradually realize one of them is probably a sociopath.
Oh wow. Okay. Okay. I'm gonna watch it. I'm gonna watch it.
It's really, really good. One of those slow burn horror movies that stays with you, and it pushes on your empathy. It's got a couple. It's not overall super violent, but it's got a couple of scenes where the violence, for me at least, was genuinely shocking
Wow.
and really effective.
Okay.
With an affective with an A in
Right.
it. It hit me in the feels in the way that horror movies often don't.
Right.
I always admire those horror movies that can make me think about them afterwards and can make me feel something unexpected like that.
Right.
Wow,
Definitely.
that's really neat.
Yeah, yeah. That's art. That's what art's all about,
Have
is
you
when
seen anything lately that I should be watching?
I'm so I have to say, and again, this is, part of me being an old man. I'm very suspicious of new horror movies. I always watch the same old stuff for the most part. But God, time is speeding up too. The older you get, time just speeds up,
It
and
does that, doesn't it? Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking like I can't think of. Oh, okay. I'm getting confused. Did you see this movie? It might be really old. I'm just thinking it's not that old because I'm old. But I think it's Spanish and it's not Terrifier, but it's something like Terrified or. And that one, let me see if I could look it up. That one was, I thought, really cool. I think it's on Shutter too.
Okay.
I'm sure you have to have seen it. Let me see. Terror.
I think it's probably one that I've seen the movie poster for and have it on my watch list, but haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, it's not Terrifier. It's something like,
Terrified or something
yeah,
like
but it
that.
had a
Look
Spanish.
the poster has like the image of that kind of demon that's like splitting in
Right.
half.
Yeah, that's it.
No, I've
Did you
never
see
seen it.
that?
I have
Oh,
not
you got
seen
to
it.
see it. You got to see it.
Okay, I will put it up to the top of my
It's
list.
cool. It's like oh man, it's got one of the creepiest. The beginning has one of the creepiest scenes I've seen in a long time.
Of
And it's
course.
very simple and it doesn't beat you over the head, but it is so creepy. And that's a good point I'd like to bring up as well is I do prefer the creeps over jump scares over extreme graphic violence.
Yeah.
I kind of enjoyed the graphic violence when I was a kid, but I feel like I grew out of it. It was it was partially the older I get, the harder it is for me to watch. It's weird. It's like the older I've gotten, and I guess you have kids. I got grandkids now. It's like
Yep.
it's harder to watch that stuff. But
The empathy kind of kicks in a different way, doesn't it?
yeah, it just kind of like goes up a notch or something
Yeah.
the older you get. But I used to enjoy that because I was into makeup effects from 12 years old. I was like, I want to be a makeup effects artist. I started reading the magazines and Fangoria magazine and trying to learn how to do this stuff. So I was looking at it from a kind of a technical standpoint, like how real can they make this
Yeah. Well,
decapitated
and
head?
then like kind of the magician's standpoint of how
Right.
did they do that and how can I
Right.
backwards engineer this and figure out what's happening? And yeah,
Yeah, that's a comment. It's funny because it's like a nerdy thing that a lot of us went through, like a stage of doing magic stuff. Because I had a period where I got a magic kit with the TV magic cards and all that stuff, and it's in makeup effects because that's a small little niche community. There's a lot of us were into magic because it's kind of like a similar thing, magic and special effects. It's all illusion stuff.
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. But yeah, that's probably Hereditary. I really, thought was
Yeah.
really good and creepy.
And I see all the problematic things about mental illness that it has.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But I think it's a really fascinating way to explore those family dynamics and yeah, look at how we relate to what's been passed on from our parents.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is for a lot of us, that's a tough thing to come to terms with.
Right.
I think Ari Aster, the writer director, once joked that he thought Hereditary was just a little family drama. And the funny thing about that is he's now totally wrong.
Yeah. I just thought that, sometimes a really, I don't know, like an unusual strong image will just really do it for me. Something that you haven't seen, and I it's been a while since I've seen it. I haven't seen it since it first came out, but that was one of those movies where I kept thinking about it after. But there's the body, the floating body. That do you remember that one scene?
Yeah,
That was so creepy and weird.
really, really good. Yeah, no, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I also prefer supernatural horror to slashers. Although I was a Halloween kid, that was I really thought, but that had the creep factor. It
yeah,
was
yeah.
creepy. The way he was in the background in a lot of shots, I really, and the music.
That first one is brilliant.
Yeah, it is. It's a masterpiece. But
The new trilogy,
you know, I honestly I haven't seen one. I'm very picky with my horror stuff. I saw Halloween 2 when it came out in the theater, and I was like, ah. And then Halloween 3 is one that I was like, what is this? And now as an adult, I really kind of love Halloween 3
I
because
think a
it's
lot
so
of people have
insane.
that response to Halloween 3.
It's got mask making, which I was into as a kid, and a mask factory and evil
and like
robots.
mass children at the end of it, right? Can't do that.
I know.
I kind of enjoy that really transgressive boundary breaking.
Yeah. And it also had that kind of supernatural thing to it. It had sort of a little bit of everything in it, which I did like. But it's funny how it was like
For the movie, but I admire its mess.
yeah. It's fun. It's fun. It's not like a masterpiece, but it was a fun kind of movie. I mean, what do you look for in a horror movie? What is it that you love? What style do you really prefer?
I'm with you that I find that this new, not new anymore. I'm like you that I say something's new and then I'm like, oh, I guess that's like 8 years
Yeah,
ago.
I know.
But the kind of trend of elevated horror, which is such an annoying name because it really is, horror that's a little more slow paced and that has the kind of technical what would you say? Yeah, technical skill that we've admired in horror for a long time,
Mhm.
and that's always been there in horror. If you
Oh
really
yeah,
think, all of a sudden, it's kind of gotten into the mainstream, and critics who normally don't like horror are trying to find different ways to say why I don't like horror, but I liked The Witch and I liked Hereditary.
right,
Now have this new term we call it elevated horror or supernatural thriller or
right.
whatever. Yeah, but I do tend to like those kind of slower paced, more meditative horror that digs underneath you rather than hits you over the head with things.
You're right.
But then I also find that movies like Hereditary that are that kind of slow burn, really thoughtful, and then all of a sudden have this kind of outrageous gore that just comes out of nowhere can be really, really effective too. So
Yeah.
I'm not opposed to gore if it's in the service of a really good story like that. But really where I go with my academic work is in some ways intuitive as well. Like you've kind of described your process that I watch a bunch of horror movies and then I kind of try to pay attention to which ones I'm thinking about days later.
Hmm.
And I'm still thinking about it. That means maybe I want to dig around and kind of poke at that and see what is there that makes me want to keep exploring it and try to see if I can understand why it's still sticking with me.
Right. Uh, I'm also a zombie freak. I am an old school zombie freak. Like, in a sense, zombies became mainstream, and it's like, oh man, I was a zombie kid before.
All these sellout zombie movies.
I was a zombie kid at 5 years old watching on TV Night of the Living Dead, or 6 years old or whatever.
As somebody who appreciates makeup so much, you've got to be a zombie.
Oh yeah. I actually got to work. One of the best projects I got to work on was the movie was I did not. I thought it was terrible, but it was the Haunted Mansion movie with Eddie Murphy. Oh man! But it was so much fun because we did me and a couple other people did the zombies. I don't know if you've seen it, but there's the zombie scene. It's a great scene. The sets were amazing, and we had to make zombies, and it was so much fun.
I think my kids would say that was one of their gateways into horror, because I remember watching that with them when they were really young and being like, this is scarier than I was maybe anticipating. I guess they're okay. All right, we'll go with that.
I was such a fan of the Haunted Mansion. I grew up going to Disneyland as a kid, and it was and so I was disappointed because I didn't feel like the tone was right. Like I said, I'm picky with my horror and stuff, but I was like it was Night of the Living Dead first, and then Dawn of the Dead. I was a huge fan. I used to go to the midnight movie of that.
I think I've still got it somewhere in my basement, that 4-disc Anchor Base set of Dawn of the Dead.
Oh, cool.
Every the US version.
Yeah. I have that.
Like everything. Yeah.
It's great. There is an HD version. I forget which version it is, but it's on YouTube. I don't know no one's noticed, but it's like a really nice, I think it's the director's cut, like the extended super long cut. But it was Zombie was another zombie, the Italian
Fulci, right?
Yeah, which is that one was I don't know. Have you seen Zombie? It's a ripoff.
Long time, but yeah,
it's worth going back to. I would say, I don't know if you like zombies. It's really good because it's very, of course, it's cheesy and gory,
sure,
but it also is really creepy. And the cinematography is excellent. The cinematography was done by a guy named Sergio Salvati, I think, and he's like a legitimate artistic cinematographer. He's done like a bunch of really cool movies. I think he was a cameraman for Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Okay. So he's like a real guy. Not just some guy. But that has some really awesome visuals, and it has a creepy atmosphere. There's like drums going on, it's kind of voodoo drums going on in the background, and I love that one. So
I like a lot of the Italian horror movies from that period. You have to not worry about how bad the dubbing is.
Right. Oh yeah.
Everybody was speaking their own language on the set. So yeah, because that's a mess. But then the style, the mood, the atmosphere.
Right.
Those old Mario Bava movies,
mm-hmm.
Just Kill Baby Kill is so fantastic.
I don't think I've seen that one.
It's one of the earlier creepy doll movies.
Oh, okay, cool.
Creepy doll movies from the 60s.
I just saw, I started watching, but I got interrupted, but I think it's Planet of the Vampires, which is I think it's Mario Bava. It was apparently like inspiration for the movie Alien.
Okay.
Wow. Yeah. And it has really weird, cool visuals for like the 60s. It's really interesting. Like the
neat, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was Planet of the Vampires.
That's right. Yeah.
Cool costumes and stuff. It's really, really, really well done, actually. But anyway, so are you a zombie guy too, or are you kind of ambivalent on zombies?
No, I guess maybe I'm, what would you say, zombie curious?
Excellent.
I certainly do some of the zombie movies. I was a big fan of the Danny Boyle 28 Days Later.
Yeah, that was great.
I really liked those. The Walking Dead got a little much for me. I've like twice started to watch it, and both times petered out. Like getting at the second season, it's like just a little too much apocalyptic nihilism.
Right.
Same thing over and over for me. But then, so I am definitely not opposed to a good zombie movie.
Okay. So what?
It's not I seek out. Train to Busan. That's maybe my favorite zombie movie.
Okay. Yeah. That's a great movie. That's a great movie. 20. See, I was like, I'm a slow zombie guy. I'm like one of the slow zombie purists.
Yeah.
Because that's what I was raised on, and that to me seems the creepiest. But but 28 Days Later was like, okay, you can have fast zombies. I accept fast zombies after 28 Days Later.
If you're going to do it this well, you can do fast
Right,
zombies.
right, exactly. You can get away with it. But I really enjoyed that. I thought that was great. I do love kind of apocalyptic settings,
Yeah.
dystopic kind of settings. Is like have you ever seen The Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price?
I've been watching a lot of Vincent Price lately, but I've not seen
Oh,
that
you
one.
gotta watch it.
That's like the first version of I Am Legend,
Yeah,
right?
it's like the only good one. It's like the only good. I think it's.
You're not a Will Smith fan?
Hey, I was open. I wanted it to be good. I actually another movie that I did designs for. They didn't get used in the movie, but the shop was trying to get that job, and we were doing designs, and I did some pretty cool designs. But I wanted to love it because I love the story. But the you have to watch it. You have to see Last Man on Earth because the Omega Man. Have you seen the Omega
I
Man?
have.
Yeah, that was like that's a fun movie, but it's very 70s and super 70s and like TV movie
So,
lighting and
Charlton Heston, who has never seen a piece of scenery he can't chew on. I mean, that's what he does, right?
but Last Man on Earth really is creepy, and it's I think it's Italian. It was an Italian American production, so it does have the weird dubbing.
Yeah.
And it is you'll see that Night of the Living Dead really George Romero has copped to this. He said that he ripped off I Am Legend, and especially Last Man on Earth is like a lot like Night of the Living Dead. Like you have to. I so want you to see it, and we could talk about it because it's so.
Definitely. Oh,
If you
thank
like
you for that.
if you like Night of the Living Dead, you'll like it. It's really cool. But
I love seeing those kind of strange or unexpected precursors to movies you
yeah,
love.
right.
Like I was, I think a few years ago, maybe more than that, again, a few years ago, probably more like 15, watching this French movie last year at Marienbad. That's an early 60s movie. And it's set in this really really strange hotel that is strangely empty and has mirrors everywhere, and there are all these long tracking shots going down the hallways and down these empty deserted corridors, and it is, I mean, it's a proto version of The Shining in so many
Wow.
ways of Kubrick's tracking shots down the hallway
Yeah,
following
yeah.
Andy on his tricycle or what have
That's
you.
so cool.
it's
Yeah,
it's really neat to see those kind of influences.
yeah. What was the name of that one?
Last year at Marienbad.
Marienbad. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. I'll look for that one.
There's a woman and her husband who are at a hotel, and she meets another man who asserts firmly that he and the woman met last year at Marienbad and had an affair, and that she told him they were supposed to meet at this hotel again at this time this year.
Oh, wow.
He does not remember
Oh,
this.
that sounds cool.
At least claims that she doesn't and doesn't know what he's talking about.
That sounds pretty good.
Yeah, it's creepy.
So I guess what I was getting at with my zombie talk is what's your thing? Like I could say I'm a zombie guy and I'm a supernatural horror. Those are
Yeah.
my kind of my two preferences.
We
I like ghosts. I like that.
Supernatural horror is definitely my jam.
Okay, okay. So
Yeah,
that makes sense. It makes
I
sense.
try to keep up with new things that come out. I try to. One of the things I've loved about the streaming era is that we have access to movies from so many different countries.
Right.
Shudder has really upped their game in like the last 2 or 3 years. I was a subscriber like 3 years ago, and I found that all the Shudder originals were just kind of mediocre and not very good, and I was wasting my time with them, so I stopped. But
Hmm.
back a few months ago, and I think realized that Shudder has been really intentional about trying to go to film festivals and pick up movies from from different countries, from different film industries that in previous eras probably would have gone overlooked and
Right.
we wouldn't know about them.
Yeah.
There's so much imaginative, neat stuff happening all over the world, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it's really cool to get to experience all of that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Did you have you seen the Haunting, the original
Oh yeah, the Robert Wise one, right?
Yeah, that was one of those childhood movies that really, really scared me.
I think it often gets referred to as like the earliest movie that is still genuinely scary.
Yeah,
I feel that way too. That scene with the holding the hand and
that was we always talked about that when we were kids, and it shows nothing. It
no,
doesn't, that's it's like it's so much scarier than showing the thing.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it was funny growing up in for me growing up in the 70s. It was like there were movies like this, The Haunting, even The House on Haunted Hill, and some of these movies. We saw all this stuff on TV. There was a lot of like ghost books. Back in the day where you go to the library and look at the ghost books, and they'd have photographs of supposed ghost pictures, and I don't know. It's funny because it's when I think of The Haunting, what that's like a '60s, probably a mid '60s film.
Like 63
Yeah, early
even.
'60s. Yeah, to me that's it's like it reminds me of the '70s because that's when I saw it. But all of that stuff, it has that movie has the feel of those ghost books I used to check out at the library. Some of those photos where
Yeah.
there's one going up a spiral staircase, and you can kind of see like the hand on and it looks like, I don't know. It's freaky. True or not, it captured my imagination at the
Oh yeah.
time. You know. Um, yeah. So, were you ever interested in any of that kind of thing when you were a kid, or was that?
So when I was a kid, I talk about chasing in my book. I talk about going to the library and trying to chase around those kinds of books, and I like kept getting sucked into Hardy Boys books
Oh yeah,
because
yeah,
they
right, right.
promised that there was something
Yeah,
mysterious or
and the
something out.
covers were
Come
awesome.
on, this is just it's Old Man Withers again in a mask or whatever.
The paint. I remember book cover. The paintings on the covers were
Yeah,
really creepy
yeah,
and
yeah.
cool.
And then the books could never live up to that at all. So I finally just said nuts to this young adult stuff and like dove into Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah. So, what? How did your family is Christian as well? It's
Yeah, yeah.
so how do they? How do they? They must be cool though, like you. So they must be good. They must be.
But
They,
yeah, it was always a negotiation. I remember one of the arguments I made with my mom because there were always negotiations over what could you watch and what can't you watch when I was picking out movies at Meyer. I knew that I could get away with this one, but maybe I shouldn't try to rent the Slumber Party Massacre and get that one with my parents. So I didn't see that one until I was in my 20s.
right.
But I made the argument, and it's kind of funny to think about this as like little Brandon as a burgeoning scholar, like, no, there's a difference between horror movies and slasher movies. Like slasher movies are the gross, nasty ones. And I'm watching horror movies, and that's yeah, there's a little bit of violence, but that's okay. And that's I mean, that's not complete bullshit. There's
Yeah. Yeah.
some
Yeah.
truth.
Definitely,
Um,
there is. I agree.
so I tended to stay on the supernatural horror side, even then as a kid. I remember one of the first movies that I genuinely was scared by and couldn't let go of was The Omen,
Oh yeah, yeah. That's a great one.
the Protestant exorcist.
Yeah.
As it,
It's funny.
so yeah, yeah, and I think my parents generally, well, growing up in the 80s, so everything was a little bit weird. I do remember going to church overnights. I remember at one overnight, somehow the chaperones had rented Children of the Corn for us to watch here. So, things were different in the
Yeah,
80s.
totally. That's so funny. So, have you gotten any pushback at all from this book? It's
Not a not a ton.
oh, good, good.
Yeah, I mean every now and then I'll get somebody posting on Facebook that, horror is the devil or whatever. And I'm like,
Right.
okay, yeah, that's I understand that. I read from my publisher that there was somebody who had requested a copy of the book and they ran a really big podcast. I thought, oh, this is interesting. And then I did a little more research and said, oh, they're on the faculty at what is that Hillsdale College at Michigan in Michigan. That's like the big right wing think tank for
Oh.
patriotism and education. I was like, I probably won't hear back for a podcast interview from them.
Yeah.
But I have not yet. So
So not so the reception has been good.
the reception's been really good. Yeah, there've been a couple of high profile reviews that I was just deeply flattered by. The one in the Los Angeles Review of Books that kind of put my work in conversation with Ligotti and
Oh, great.
this other scholar named
Oh yeah,
Victoria.
yeah. I read that one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it was just fascinating because he was kind of looking at how I'm arguing that horror helps us cope with the real horrors of the world, whereas somebody like Ligotti kind of comes at it from the opposite direction, saying, I've got all this terrible stuff inside me, and I've got to write these horror stories to almost inoculate myself,
Right, right. Yeah, yeah.
and that I think paradoxically both can be
I
true.
know. That's what I was gonna say. It's like I think there's some truth to both of those.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know.
I love Ligotti and his I think his conspiracy against the human race is a fascinating exploration of what horror does and why we're drawn to it,
Hmm,
either as creators or as consumers of it.
right. Yeah, I haven't
Yeah.
read it. I haven't read him.
Oh, his fiction is fantastic. Kind of like an heir to Lovecraft with,
Oh wow,
if you can imagine Lovecraft without all the racism, which is
that would be
tough
nice.
to do. But yeah, Ligotti's got a really, really dark cosmic horror sense that
Oh,
I
cool.
just
Okay.
great,
So
great thing.
I wanted to. God, I gotta write. I need to write these things down. I keep thinking of like a million questions I want
We can chat back and forth, and I can be reminded of the movies I'm supposed to watch from you, and
to.
Thomas Ligotti or other names like that.
Right. I'm just writing things down and trying to remember what I was going to ask you. Uh, uh, so the reception has been good on the book. Has the book selling well?
Yeah, it's early enough that I'm not getting tons of detailed data, but my publisher's happy with how it's going.
Oh, good.
It's from a small publisher, so it's not we're not planning on having it on the New York Times bestseller list
Right.
or anything like that. But
But
it's selling a reasonable amount of copies. I'm surprised that I've heard a couple of classrooms that are using it already, and like
cool.
undergraduate level courses on religion and horror or things like that. I'd love to see some church groups explore it as well.
I
I think it
know, right?
would be neat for book study groups like that. I had one friend on Twitter suggest he was going to throw it at his pastor and demand that he read it, and I thought maybe that's not the approach, but
It's so well written though. I really enjoyed it. It's just really good. It's great on I thought it was just excellent. Just excellent. So I want more. Like I said, I'm going to recommend it to everybody who listens to the podcast because I really think, this community, this is a good book for us, for our community. I think people will love it. I wanted to ask you also, we're getting near the end here, but how have you considered, writing fiction, going back to that, or
yeah.
are you kind of satisfied? Because this is kind of, like you're saying, it's kind of a cool hybrid where you're able to do academic work, but it's in a creative way. But do you still feel like you want to do?
I do. I last year picked up the short story writing again. I've
Oh,
written about
great.
maybe three or four that I'm starting to circulate. Would love to see published at some point or another.
Horror?
Um,
Is it horror?
yeah,
Excellent.
kind of low key, slow burn horror.
Very cool.
And one of them even trying to, what is it like if I it's not this well thought through, but what is it like if I kind of try to backwards engineer some of these ideas and lurking under the surface and write a horror story that in some ways kind of explores these issues or
Hmm.
has protagonists who are exploring these issues and being
Hmm.
confronted with these kinds of
Oh
connections.
yeah, yeah,
What does that look like? So,
yeah. That sounds fun. So you just
yeah.
so it's just something you enjoy and maybe something.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, maybe. I enjoy writing. So kind of write and see where it goes. And I know some of the stuff I write is probably going to get published, and some of it maybe not. I often let publishers decide that for me.
Hmm.
So feel like I'm ready to start getting some of these stories out there and submitted and see if anything happens with them.
Wow. Well, I hope you do. I think I'd love to read some. I I always wanted to. That was one of the things that when I was a kid I wanted to do was be a writer, and because I was a big Stephen King, Clive Barker were my two. Stephen King was, the one that started it all for me, and his book on writing's amazing. Have you read that?
Oh, yeah, so good.
I love that
Both
book.
that one and then his Danse Macabre, his earlier book where
Yeah,
he kind of
right.
talks about horror and what it means to him. Some fantastic things. So
Yeah, yeah. But that's one of the things I wasn't able to do. So I admire writers also. I
I
would
think
I would want to do it.
my favorite quote about what horror means or what scares us really actually comes from Salem's Lot. It was funny because when I first read the quote, I assumed it was from On Writing or Danse Macabre or something, and had to track it down. But he says that the scariest thing is a door partially ajar. I love that
Yeah,
idea.
that is perfect. That is perfect. Yeah, the that kid in Salem's Lot was like that was me. I'm sure he based that kid on me because I was a little blonde weirdo kid, and I had a
Yep.
magic set like that kid, and I had those monster models all over my room. I mean, it was like uncanny.
Stephen King knows his fans really well. He keeps showing up in his books.
Yeah,
Definitely
right. Yeah, yeah. He's amazing. He's a person I would love to meet someday or work with. I think it'd be amazing. But um, yeah, I have a book that came out. I kickstarted. It's an art book, but
yeah.
it's I'll have to send you a copy. I think you'd like it.
Oh, I
It's
would love that.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. It came out really good. I'm really happy with it. But
Fantastic. So good.
yeah. So well, what do you have? Do you have anything plans for future plans or anything? You got anything?
I've always got way too many projects in the works. I've usually got one book coming and one book going. Um, kind of, kind of my idea is to try to keep one foot in both worlds of academia and worlds of more general books that people want to read. So the book I'm finishing up now is another academic book. It's for Oxford University Press, though, so I think it'll
Wow.
get a little bit of traction than earlier stuff. Yeah, I found out the biblical scholars editor at OUP is a monsters guy. I couldn't
Really?
believe. Yeah, yeah, he was right into the religion and horror thing.
Oh, that's so
So I'm
cool.
working on both this book for Oxford that's called Concerning Dust and Ashes. I'm looking at how encounters with God in the Bible sometimes lead to experiences of wonder where we're just overjoyed and exalted, but sometimes lead to terror.
Right.
I'm focusing on that, what happens when they lead to terror, and then trying to come up with this idea that I'm not sure I've got quite yet, but the idea that horror can teach us things that we couldn't really conceive of rationally because it kind of gets at them, it bypasses our mind to get right through the,
Right.
and then we're able to learn things that we would reject otherwise or that we wouldn't be able to think about. So, questions like what does the world really look like without people? um, I don't know if we can ever get there, but we can at least get closer if we think about it through the lens of horror or if we feel it through horror.
Right. That's so
So that's
interesting.
kind of the idea I'm working with. I'm also co-editing a book for them called the Oxford Handbook of Biblical Monsters, where we've got
Cool.
scholars all over the world who are writing about Leviathan and Behemoth on one hand, but also like the monstrosity of the crucifixion is one chapter,
Right.
and the way that the Jewish people are turned into monsters in the Gospels. How we
Right.
rhetorically construct them as monsters. So all sorts of interesting questions
That's
like
so
that.
cool. I wonder if you could if one of these academic books comes out so well that you could kind of modify it and publish it as a kind of a mainstream book.
It It could be, and that's in some ways what I did with Lurking Under the Surface. That I had a previous book called Reading the Bible with Horror. I was pretty happy with that title.
That is good.
Where I kind of took some of these ideas and worked with them in different ways. So I really don't think Lurking Under the Surface is like a simplified version of what I try to do or anything like that.
Right.
But yeah, I am less concerned about the footnotes and concerned
Right.
about engaging with other scholars and things like that because I want to tell stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think I'm gaining more confidence with this new book I'm working on for Oxford that I can have fewer footnotes and can read a text without having to engage in every other scholar who's ever written an article about that text.
Right.
So maybe trying to find some kind of hybrid way and that maybe leans slightly more to the academic than towards the creative, but still has both of those elements there.
I hope you keep doing it. I mean, it's an interesting little niche kind of this. I could see you, taking it in a lot of different directions using the kind of basic idea that, Christianity, spirituality, and the Bible and horror, monsters, and kind of dark stuff. I think it's a very rich subject, a rich topic that you could probably make a bunch, do a lot more books.
I keep saying that, I'll write about something different when I feel like I've run out of things to say on this field. And so far, I can't see that horizon where I feel like I'm tired of it and ready to move on.
Oh, good.
Like horror and religion is a pretty, I guess to mix my metaphors, pretty fruitful ground to keep planting.
Yeah. That's very cool. Well, I hope you keep doing it. I'm thoroughly enjoying the book, and I'll read anything that you write now.
Thank you, man.
Well, I really enjoyed talking to you, man. It was so much fun. Thank you.
A good conversation. I enjoyed this so much. I'm honored to be on this podcast.
I appreciate you taking the time out, and where can people find your work?
Lurking Under the Surface is published through Broadleaf Books, but it's available. You can go to the Broadleaf website or pick it up at any of the online stores, Amazon or Barnes and Noble or wherever, and you shop local if you can. Your local bookstore may have it, or they can certainly order it for you pretty easily. It's available through all those distribution channels.
And you have a website?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, just brandongrafius.com is the website where you can learn more about other stuff. I try to stay active on Twitter at brgrafius, even though Twitter is becoming more and more of a dumpster fire all the time.
I know. It's such a bummer. I was just getting like a lot of followers on there, and it all got.
I'm feeling it. I feel like every time I get a new follower, I'm excited, and I go look at my profile. And I'm like, wait, I have fewer than I did yesterday. It is a sinking ship that people are leaving, but we don't have any.
I know.
That's right now. We've all invested so much time into building up our platform on Twitter.
Right. Well, great. Whoa, I forgot to. You're a musician, also.
Yeah.
I was listening to some of your music. It's so good.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, really. I mean, you're playing guitar and everything on.
Yeah, I play guitar and banjo.
That's so great.
Yeah, my goal with that album was to write the best Gordon Lightfoot album that I could. Go back into that singer-songwriter's mode from the 70s.
It was great, man. It was great. I'm a guitar player also, so it's like,
right.
Yeah, I tried.
Whole thing. A couple of neat connections. The drummer for that album used to play in the Verve Pipe in the 90s.
Oh, no way. I remember the Verve Pipe.
Tommy Brown they were a Michigan band. So,
oh, cool.
Yeah, I connected with him. And the guy who plays harmonica a couple of times, I grew up with him at church. And when he was in college, he met Willie Nelson's daughter, and the two of them got married. So he is Willie Nelson's son-in-law. Produced and played harmonica on a couple of Willie's albums.
That's great. Yeah, I was so impressed. I was like, I was like, oh, he plays music. And I was like, sheesh, this sounds really good.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So multi-talented. Well, thank you so much for, again, coming on. And we just have to say goodbye to the audience, which is what I do at the end of every show. So we just say, however you want, just say goodbye, audience.
Thanks for listening. Goodbye, audience.